To continue with our theme of power and authority in Hindu architecture, let's turn to Angkor Wat, the largest religious complex in the world and our last Hindu work. Hindu art of the Gupta period spread from India southeast to Burma and Cambodia, where it developed a new and distinctly imperial character under the patronage of the Khmer, that is, the Cambodian monarchs. By the 12th century, these powerful monarchs, ruling out of Angkor, which is just Khmer for city or capital, controlled an area that included portions of what today are Thailand and Vietnam. As a king of the gods, a Khmer ruler was actually deified during his own lifetime. The kingdom of Angkor began to flourish in the 9th century along the northern shore of the Tonle Sap, the Great Lake, which dominates the center of Cambodia. Now, this lake was to the Khmer what the Nile was to the ancient Egyptians. During the monsoon season, the Tonle Sap quadruples in size. When the dry season returns, water flows out of the lake, leaving a fertile layer of mud behind. So long ago, the Khmer learned how to divert that retreating water to increase rice production. This should be reminding you of Egypt and also Mesopotamia. As the population increased, the Khmer began to manage water ever more intensively, not only for agriculture, but also for religious purposes. They created broad moats around temples and built immense sacred lakes called bareys, symbolic of the ocean surrounding Mount Meru, the mythical Mount Meru, home of the Hindu gods and center of the universe. Water plays a very important role in Hinduism, as it does in many religions. Ritual bathing, especially in the holy Ganges in India, is a central purification ritual, and all Hindu temples will have some place for bathing or preparing to meet the god. The city of Angkor, crossed by an extensive network of broad avenues and canals, covered about 70 square miles. In the 12th century, the capital of Angkor may have contained a population of 1 million people. By contrast, Paris, which was one of the great cities of Europe at the time, had a population of maybe 30,000 people. The royal palaces were built of perishable materials, and they've long since disappeared. But the temples were constructed out of brick and stone, and many remain really in a remarkably good state of preservation, especially when you consider this is surrounded by jungle. The largest of these temples is Angkor Wat, which means Temple of the Capital. It was built during the reign of King Suryavarman II in the first half of the 12th century. Its central spire is about 200 feet tall, and the moat surrounding the complex is over 2 miles in circumference. The broad moat and the outer wall symbolize the oceans and mountains ringing the edge of the world in Hindu cosmology. Within, the 5 towers stand for 5 peaks of Mount Meru, the main peak and the 4 subsidiary peaks. That's the Himalayan mountains. That's the heart of the Hindu universe and the home of the Hindu gods. You think of Mount Olympus, for example. The temple is oriented so that viewers passing through the western gate at sunrise on the summer solstice, June 21st, which is the beginning of the Cambodian solar year, would see the sun rise directly over the central tower. Again, think of Stonehenge. We have other places, the pyramids, where the building has been oriented to make it a kind of astronomical observatory as well. At any rate, this orientation may further tie the architecture and the deified king with the cosmos. The temple's central icon depicted Suryavarman in the guise of Vishnu. An inner rectangle, 3 stories high, has 5 towered shrines and connecting colonnades accessible by stairways. At the focal point of this complex is the central temple, which again stands for Mount Meru. So the entire conception is a 2- and 3-dimensional mandala, or representation of the cosmos. Suryavarman II was unusual among Khmer kings in making Vishnu the focus of court religious life. Most Hindu temples were dedicated to Shiva, god of all creation and destruction, and they faced east because Shiva ruled the eastern quadrant of the compass. Angkor Wat, however, faces west, probably because Vishnu ruled the western quadrant of the compass, but maybe also because the sun sets in the west, and this probably served as his tomb. So why did this king choose Vishnu instead of Shiva as his personal diva? Well, historians argue about this. But Suryavarman II was pretty clearly trying to establish that he was a different sort of king than his immediate predecessors. And one way to do that, of course, is to have a different god. So one theory holds that Suryavarman chose Vishnu, the nourishing and preserving god, because there had been so much political instability in the Khmer Empire before he basically took over rule at the beginning of his reign. So think of how Augustus represented himself as the preserver of peace and order after a time of chaos. So this bas-relief in the South Gallery of Angkor Wat, and by the way, it is not one of your required works, shows the king seated on an elaborate wooden dais whose legs and railings are carved to resemble Naga snakes. Vishnu is often portrayed resting on a snake. Snake had a lot of powerful imagery in the Hindu religion, in part because India has a lot of dangerous poisonous snakes. Snakes often represented evil, as they of course do in the Christian and Hebrew tradition, but also a kind of cunning and wisdom. But again, you see Vishnu and the king overpowering the snake. The numerous parasols that you see, very stylized, are ancient emblems of royalty and high rank throughout the East. Okay, so you have this map of Angkor Wat in your workbook. I recommend you open it up and try to follow the virtual tour you're about to see. The guy's, I assume Australian accent, is a little thick and he goes fast. Just try to catch some of the stories, especially the references to Mount Meru and the description of how the design of the complex reflects the Khmer Hindu view of creation and the structure of the universe. Well, this is one of your required images, and you read about this story, I hope. And I also hope you'll have time to watch another children's cartoon version. Basically, this is a Hindu creation myth. Asuras, or demons, have gained control of the earth, so the devas, or gods, seek help from Vishnu. He advises them to form an alliance with the demons and to jointly churn the ocean for the nectar of immortality, or Amrita. Mount Mandara, one of the 4 spurs of Mount Meru, the world axis, was torn out to use as a churning stick. It was studied at the bottom of the ocean by Vishnu in his avatar. An avatar is an incarnation, and Vishnu is famous for his many avatars, including Lord Krishna and Lord Rama, who were actually political leaders as well as gods. At any rate, this is his incarnation as the tortoise Kurma. The gods and demons pulled back and forth on the snake's body, causing the mountain to rotate, and that in turn churned the ocean. But once the mountain was placed on the ocean, it began to sink. So Vishnu, again, as Kurma the tortoise, came to the rescue and supported the mountain on its back. This is all done really quite well in the cartoon, if not with precisely great animation. At any rate, when the Amrita appeared, the Devas and the Asuras fought over its possession, though they had originally agreed to share it equally. After many adventures, the Amrita was finally consumed by the gods, who were thus restored to strength and able to defeat the demons. In the late 13th century, Angkor Wat gradually moved from Hindu to Theravada Buddhist use as Theravada Buddhism, and we'll talk about this on day 4, became the dominant religion in Southeast Asia. It continues to be used as a Buddhist temple to the present day, and Angkor Wat is unusual among the Angkor temples in that although it was somewhat neglected after the 16th century, it was never completely abandoned, in part because it had that moat that protected it from encroachment by the jungle. As you'll see, not all temples were as fortunate. I think that's a cool picture. Suryavarman vanished around 1150 CE. Maybe he was murdered. He was probably buried in Angkor Wat. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this. Toward the end of the century, a new king came to the Khmer throne, Jayavarman VII. Now, Jayavarman was a contradictory man. He was a devout Buddhist mystic, but he waged war pretty constantly. He expanded the empire, and he very freely exacted tribute from his defeated foes. His statues portray, such as this one, this is not a required work, portray him deep in meditation, smiling with those half-closed eyes, detached from worldly things. But he embarked on vast building projects to his own glory that required the labor of hundreds of thousands of slaves. He also kept hundreds of concubines. So just north of Angkor Wat, there we go, Jayavarman built a walled city of temples, pools, and terraces, Angkor Thom, or Great City, and this is a required image. I'm sorry, is. At the center, he raised his state temple, the Bayon, B-A-Y-O-N. If Angkor Wat is the classical Khmer ideal, then Bayon is its Gothic sibling. It has crooked passageways, dark galleries, forests of stone pillars. This would be the Hindu temple that you'd want to turn into a Halloween house. By the way, a statement about it being Gothic is going to make more sense when we study Gothic art in Unit 5. 54 towers rise from Angkor Thom's ramparts, each carved with 4 gigantic smiling faces. The College Board labeled these carved faces as Jayavarman, represented as Buddha. Some scholars, however, think that they may be depictions of bodhisattvas. Remember, those are the compassionate attendants of the Buddha. We're going to meet a lot more of them very soon. The complex is a mix of Hindu and Buddhist imagery. After Jayavarman's death, the temple was modified and augmented by both Hindu and Buddhist kings. The city eventually fell into decline and was abandoned in the early 17th century. Okay, back to the churning of the ocean milk and children's cartoons. You're probably not going to have time for this in class. I've been very long-winded. But the whole 15-minute video, that's starting at the beginning, is up on Moodle. This clip begins when the chief Vedic god, Indra, comes to Vishnu to ask for his help in getting rid of the demons who have taken over the god's land, Indraloka. Again, you're going to have an opportunity to watch these story videos as part of a lunchtime extra credit opportunity. But now we'll move on to Buddhist art.